Record on this computer. Excellent. Ready, John?
Yep, ready.
Let's do it. Welcome.
Hey, everyone. Welcome. Just let a few more people roll in.
Hey, Seb. Hey, Anna. Nice to see you, Raphael. Nice to see you, Ash. Good to see mentors in here too. Hey, Jackie. Hey, Chris. Hi, Roger. Awesome.
All right. Looks like we've got a few of you in it now. Just a few more seconds while you're rolling in. And then we'll get started. All right. Looks like it's slowed down. Great. I'm Zach from Blackbird. I've got Mel running ops on the back end today. We've done a switcheroo and we're here with Jon Manning from Pricing Profits. John's had quite an extensive career looking at pricing for some pretty big and exciting companies. He spent a few years at car sales. He's now working over at MyOb, and he's also written a book with a title that I cannot even attempt to pronounce. So I'll leave it up to John. And today he's going to take us through some great stuff on pricing. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Zach. So my book is called Overcoming Floccinaucinihilipilification. It's the longest F word in the English language, and it means the habit of estimating something as valueless. And I picked that title because 10 years ago when I started working with startups, that's what they were doing. When I asked them what their monetization model or their pricing model was, they'd say, just going to get some Twitter followers and some YouTube subscribers and we'll worry about monetization later. I was just telling Mel before the call started that across cohorts 3 and 4, I've spoken to 28 different businesses going through the program. And it's a real refreshing change to have pricing discussions so early in your respective journeys. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'll just get the buttons right, is just 3 things. I'm going to talk about some pricing myths and some pricing mistakes. I'm going to spend some time talking about pricing methodologies, and I'm going to spend a fair bit of time actually talking about value-based pricing, which is the most sustainable of the pricing models that are available to people. So let's start off with some pricing myths. The first one is the myth of a perfect price. There is no such thing as a perfect price. The perfect price for one customer will be imperfect for another. And things such as the right time, the right place, the right location are all contributing factors to why there's no such thing as a perfect price. Likewise, these days, there's a myth regarding full price or list price or recommended retail price, whatever you want to call it. Most customers in both B2B markets and B2C markets are looking for what I call the thrill of the hunt and the thrill of the kill. The hunt is to get a discount and the kill is to actually obtain that discount and the bragging rights that go with it. So increasingly, there's no such thing as full price anymore. The myth of procurement. Procurement used to be the enemy of pricing, and pricing used to be the enemy of procurement. If you, particularly in B2B markets, if you come up against procurement people, work with them rather than against them, and actually spend some time with procurement people and try and understand what tools and approaches they use to try and beat customers down on price. I don't believe there's any such thing as a world first pricing model anymore. You hear companies like Uber with their surge pricing saying, this is a world first pricing model. Well, if you go back to 1666 and the Great Fire of London, the boatmen evacuating people from the north side of the River Thames where the fire was to the south side actually doubled or tripled their fares that night. And I think a lot of pricing is transferable from one business to the other. The myth of markets and the invisible hand. A lot of people say we don't have control over our pricing. It's the market that sets pricing, or in Adam Smith's favorite term, it's the invisible hand. I disagree with that. Behind every market, there's either a pricing person like me or a sales rep or someone like that who is accepting a price that a customer is asking for. So there's no invisible hand. There's no market per se. Likewise, the traditional economic theory, there are things like demand and supply curves that you see in Economics 101 textbooks and stuff like that. They always have demand and supply for one product. The reality is that the world these days is much more complex than that. There are multiple products in markets. There are intermediaries that are not reflected in demand and supply curves, and so on and so forth. The myth of cost plus pricing. Customers don't buy because of costs. No one in here will buy from a particular, say, telco, for example, because they've got the cheapest cost base. They'll buy because the coverage is good, and other reasons associated with value. This is one I hear of quite a few times. That pricing model worked in our spreadsheet. Everything works in a spreadsheet. But when you get out and launch your businesses and your pricing model, it's got to work with the customer, not just a spreadsheet. Myth number 9 is stealth price changes. So you used to be able to get away with a sneaky stealth price increase, whether it be shrinkflation, which is a lot of talk about at the moment, where instead of selling a pack of Tim Tams with 11 biscuits in it, you sell one with 10 biscuits. It's a 10 biscuits in it. It's a stealth price increase. You may remember the real famous example of what became known as Farmer Bro, who increased the price of a infectious disease tablet drug from $13.50 to $7.50 overnight. There's a documentary on him on Amazon Prime, I think. I think he's currently in jail for offences other than this astronomical price hike. And the last myth to talk about is that pricing models are not for life. They, like products, have life cycles and they have to change over time. Years ago, airlines used to buy these engines for astronomical price points. Today, they are sold on power by the hour contracts. They are the leased or subscription, if you like, and the pricing model is actually aligned to the airline's model, which means that they get charged to use the engine when the aircraft is moving people around from A to B. When the airline is not moving people from A to B, they are not getting charged for this engine. So that evolution in the pricing model has happened over the last 10 or 20 years and so forth. And I would just keep your eye out for signals that your pricing model may be reaching the end of its life cycle. Go on to some pricing mistakes that I've commonly seen. Again, nice number, 10. Number 1, leaving pricing too late in the marketing process. I always view pricing as a product development initiative rather than a last-minute go-to-market initiative. If I go back quite a few years, I remember a judge in a Telstra Business Award asking a candidate for a Telstra Business Award what the price was of his product and service, and he didn't have an answer. He actually hadn't thought about what price to charge. Way too late to be thinking about pricing. Top-down pricing to fix the profit and loss statement. Companies are not going to pay you more just because your profit and loss is more loss than profit, or likewise, you're not achieving budget. Don't confuse budgeting with pricing. There's numerous calculators around on the internet for various industries helping you to work out what price you should charge. They're actually better budgeting tools, particularly found in the consultant space, where the calculators say, okay, if you want to work 48 weeks of the year and you want such and such an income, you need to charge this. Cost plus pricing, I'll come back to that in a minute. Taking too narrow a perspective of the competition. I think these days, most companies face competition, not wholesale competition, but rather the risk of death by 1,000 cuts. You've got a startup here and a startup there who is eating a little bit of someone's lunch here, there, and everywhere, and so forth. So it's really important to take a pretty broad perspective of the competition. A lot of companies use the same average across all products and services for price increases. I know companies where people can't see the 5 on their keyboard button because they're constantly doing 5% price increases. Not segmenting your customer base is another common mistake. For a lot of the people I've already spoken to in mentoring sessions, they're very early stage. But there comes a point in time where you need to actually scale your pricing through the segmentation of customers. Mechanical price changes, we are coming up to the peak mechanical price changes, the 1st of July in Australia, new budgets kicking in, new financial year kicking in, and a lot of companies, for that reason, execute a price change for the 1st of July. There are some industries where there are pricing norms and standards. Pharmaceuticals has been one of those. If you're entering into an industry that has pricing norms and standards, it's worth challenging them. You could be pleasantly surprised. And then finally, one last mistake is not changing your pricing model. I like to give you 2 examples of changes in pricing models. This is what the first and second fleet looked like under deck on the journey from Australia to Botany Bay. The first two fleets that sailed to Australia, the crew and the captain and so forth were paid on departure from England. And along the journey, through scurvy and things like that, there were hundreds of convicts that were lost in transit. But it didn't matter because the crew had already been paid in England. The third and the fourth fleets actually got paid on arrival in Australia. And as a result, there were very few deaths on the third and the fourth fleet when they sailed to Australia. It was a flip from a prepaid to a postpaid model. And it was far more effective in terms of getting the cargo to Australia in a live form, if you like. This is another example of someone who changed her pricing model. This is a lady by the name of Monique Kinheady, who came to me in 2006, just after she had launched what at the time was called Flow Car Share, but is now known as FlexiCar. And she spoke to me and said, I think I've launched with the wrong pricing model. And what she had done was launched with a model which only charged customers when they used the vehicle. So if you were one car or a no car family and you had one of these parked nearby, you could rent it for a couple of hours and do an IKEA run or a Woolies run or whatever you like, drop it back in the parking spot, and you just paid for the couple of hours you had. What she realized pretty quickly was that she had expenses like insurance and depreciation and so forth, which weren't probably being covered by her current pricing model. But more importantly than that, she realized that she had to change her pricing model if she was going to continue to provide value to the 1,000 customers who signed up with her in the first 12 months of her operation. So we sat down and we devised subscription model. And this was at a time when subscription models were I wouldn't say unheard of, but they were only just in their infancy. And we went out to her 1,000 customers and said, we're sorry, but we think we've launched this business with the wrong pricing model. We think you value what we provide to you. We've got to change. This is what we're changing to. And we understand if you need to go elsewhere. She also at the time had 50 businesses that also had cars, say in garages, in city office buildings, which would be a car that a small business could use amongst their sales reps for company visits and so forth. Her business development manager went and met with those 50 companies and had exactly the same conversation. And that conversation ended with, we understand if you need to go elsewhere. 12 months later, she hadn't lost a single customer. That base of 1,000 customers and the 50 companies that were with her on that, when we made the price change, were contributing 20% more revenue. They all accepted the change to the business model. And I think it was only a couple of years later that Monique sold the business to Hertz Car Rental. So that's another great example of someone who's changed her pricing model. So I've mentioned cost plus pricing a couple of times. There's a variety of pricing methodologies that are out there. And there's 4 categories that I've got here on this, highlighted on this slide. There's things like cost plus pricing or market or competition-led pricing, non-linear pricing, which you see from utilities, gas companies, telcos, where you pay to be on the network and you pay to go what goes through the network. And then you have dynamic pricing, which is things like the airlines and the hotels use. Those pricing models are all developed by the vendor or the seller. Across here, 7, 8, and 9, you have auctions, contingency-based pricing, or pay what you want. There's a few interesting sites that do pay what you want pricing. There used to be Lentil as Anything, a restaurant in Melbourne. I think it went out of business in February. Or Jon Bon Jovi has 3 pay what you want restaurants in New Jersey. They're pricing models where the customer actually creates the pricing. The ones that are a little bit more sustainable are those that are co-created with the customers, which is value-based pricing, which I'm going to talk a bit more about in a minute, as well as input-output hybrids. But cost plus pricing, as I mentioned before, is pretty much a flawed pricing model. Nobody pays you whatever you charge because of your cost base. They pay because of the value that you're providing. How important is pricing? This research gets done time and time again, and the results are always very similar. If you can improve each of these 4 parts of your business by 1%, this is the likely impact you'll see on your operating profit. If you can improve your fixed costs by 1%, so reduce them by 1%, you'll typically see a 2.3% improvement in operating profit. For 1% increase in the volume of stuff you sell, 3.3% improvement in operating profit. For variable costs, 7.8%. But if you can improve your price by 1%, you typically see anywhere between 10 and 12% improvement in operating profit, because it just goes straight through to the bottom line. So let's talk about some of these value-based pricing methodologies. I've got 4 methodologies here to walk you through, and some of you that I've met already, I think I've actually shared some of these with you. So the first one is what's known as the price sensitivity meter. It's also known as the Van Westendorp methodology because it was created by a Dutchman in 1975, Peter Van Westendorp, when he was doing a master thesis at a university at Holland. So where would you use this? When you want to obtain a customer's perception of a price point. And it involves asking 4 questions. At what price does the product look cheap, look expensive, look too cheap, and look too expensive? It's a very simple, cheap, and easy methodology to use. We'll see the sort of outputs in the moment. It'll identify a range of prices, and results can vary across various customers. It doesn't consider the competitive product set really well. Sometimes you may be better off giving customers price points to pick from. Sometimes you may be better off letting the customer provide their own price points. And the jury's out as to whether one of those 2 methodologies is better or not. And it also doesn't necessarily provide a propensity to buy. So you can ask customers about prices, but would they buy at that price? And you can mitigate that by asking a willingness to pay price. You take the responses to those 4 questions and you plot them on a chart like this. And what you end up with is usually a area here where the 4 lines intersect, and that's your pricing opportunity or your pricing window in that box. There's a point of marginal expensiveness, a point of marginal cheapness, an indifference price point, and an optimal price point, which will tend to give you you can choose between the best uptake or the best price point. Steep slopes mean if you get the price wrong, there's a greater risk of loss of customers, and a shallow slope is a little bit safer. You can actually simplify this even more. And if you're familiar with the concept of the Net Promoter Score, this is how I've simplified this approach. You could actually just ask acceptable, expensive, and too expensive, and aggregate the expensive to get a net acceptability measure from your pricing research, which is the chart on the right there. This is an example of that sort of research that I did in the wedding industry not too long ago for a wedding industry client. It was really interesting because this company felt it was a two-sided marketplace, but they felt they could only monetize one side of the market. But regardless of that, we just threw some questions out to the other side of the market to see if there was willingness to pay for a concierge service where somebody organized a wedding for you. And you can actually see that there was a very high net acceptability at a $200 price point for someone to organize a wedding for a bride and the groom. So that's an example of a real life example of doing that research and actually applying it. Methodology number 2 is to use a thing called customer value analysis. Now, you can use this to obtain customers' perceptions of value attributes and features. And one of those features can be price, or you can derive price using this methodology. There's a description here of the steps involved, and it might make a little bit more sense on the next slide when I show you what that looks like in tabular format. But what it involves is identifying value attributes or features of the product that you're going to offer to customers and getting them to weight those product value attributes such that they sum to a total of 100%. So you might have 4 attributes of 25% each. And then you get customers to assess your product on those particular value attributes. So if it's reliability on a scale of 0 to 10, how do we rank? And then you can actually benchmark your product against other products that you might offer or competitors offer. And this is where you often see the use of a value map. So in tabular format, it looks like this. The attributes here are performance, battery life, warranty, and brand. That's the weighting there. This is the product we are pricing here, the product being priced, and the customer has ranked us on 7 for performance, 8 for battery life, 9 for warranty, and 3 for brand. When we weight them, they come down to 2.8, 2.5, and 0.3, and that sums to 7.4. We can benchmark this against a product that we've already offered, and we get that middle section of the table there, or a competitor product. And for a product already offered and a competitive product, prices may already exist for those products, which makes setting a price for the new product relative to those ones an easy exercise based on the total number here, 7.4 versus 6.7, for example. And then taking that into a value map, we can see that and you often see this in many industries, a low value, low price, a mid value, mid price, and a high value, high price product. Where you don't want to be is in the A space here, where you're offering a product with similar value to the $299 product here, but at a much higher price. And if you're facing disruption from a particular competitor, or you yourselves are being disruptive, you probably want to, one of the hallmarks of disruption is that you're offering something at a cheaper price with a similar amount of value. And that's exactly the area that B is operating in there. This is an example I did for a client in the fresh flower industry many years ago. The company is called Wafex. It still exists. You've probably bought flowers from a retailer that they wholesale to. And you can see here that the raw rankings here are the dark bars here, and that were their scores there for product and range support, convenience, and price. The interesting thing to look at is that price was so much higher of both a raw ranking and a weighted ranking for the competitors versus Wafex. So they had a fair bit of pricing power that they could capitalize on. The third methodology, which tends to be more useful in B2B markets than B2C markets, is the use of economic value analysis. And this is where you quantify the economic value that you create with your product and service and use that as a basis for monetization or pricing, or some people even call it value extraction. And this can be done in various ways. This is where you start, the early days of this, you used value word equations. And this was a value word equation for a company called Rockwell Automation, which said if the cost of acquiring a solution from a competitor is more than the cost from acquiring it from us, then you should go with us. But if it is less, then you are better off with the competitor, and we'll make no bones about that. There are three ways that you can provide economic value to customers in B2B markets. You can increase their revenue, you can reduce their costs, or you can minimize their risk. And there are examples in this table here of each of them. And because these are sources of economic value, they can usually be quantified. And once you start quantifying that economic value, you can then say, for example, okay, well, I'm going to charge 2% of that economic value, or 10% or 20% as my pricing model. And there is a tangible link there between what you're getting and the value that the customer is getting and paying for from you. The last methodology I want to talk about, and I think this is probably one that a lot of people are interested in, is subscriptions or SaaS. This is where to use this, where you obtain customers' perceptions of value attributes, features, and price via a discovery or a customer relationship exercise. I build out SaaS pricing models for companies in a 5-step process. Step 1 is to define the architecture. Now that means the number of products that you want to offer. Do you want to use a freemium offering? Do you want to use a value metric or consumption-based pricing? And I'll come back to that in a minute. And what duration do you want to offer your prices over? Do you want to offer monthly prices? Do you want to offer annual prices? Do you want to offer 24 or 36-month prices, for example? The second step is to define and differentiate across the architecture the operative product features, the stuff the product does. The third step is to build out further differentiation across the architecture with non-operative product features. And that's things like the terms and conditions, the talent and people that customers have access to, the technology, customization opportunities, timing, education, training, support, and content. The fourth option, identify any optional extras. So are there things that you are putting in one or two products in the architecture, but not in the third, but the third people might want it as an optional extra. And then the fifth step is to have a think about segmentation, the value provided, and the willingness to pay of customers. Freemium was something that is something that always comes up. I won't go to a lot of detail of what's on this slide, and I'm happy to make these slides available after the session today. So don't worry about screen grabbing or photographing or whatever. But there's a good 10-step process here. The more of those 10 questions you can answer yes to, the more likely a freemium model will be a success for you. There are generally three types of free in freemium that you could offer, which is around free time, free usage, or free features. So there's some considerations around freemium there. If you rewind the clock to about 3 years ago, subscription models were the gold standard in pricing models. And if you wanted to talk to an investor, and you could comfortably talk to them about how much annual recurring revenue or ARR you had month in, month out, they were interested in talking to you. In the last 3 years, there's probably been a shift away to what's called consumption or usage-based pricing. And I think there's a couple of factors behind the change. If you think that we've gone from transactional-based pricing, where a company would, buy let's say a box of software in a shrimp rank box and so forth, and unwrap it and stick a CD in a computer, versus a cloud-based application that does the same thing on a subscription model. And now you're going into usage or consumption-based pricing. What's changed from the transactional model when we go to subscription is every month the customer has decided whether or not they want to continue doing business with you. With usage or consumption-based pricing, it almost takes it down to the day. So is the customer going to continue doing business with you because you're charging on a usage or consumption basis is a decision they'll think about every day with consumption-based pricing. Companies like Twilio and Snowflake are the leaders in the pack with consumption-based pricing. And there is still a lot of companies that do both. So they have subscription, and they have a little bit of, included in the subscription is X amount of usage, and then there's additional charges when you go over those usage levels. How do you work out what the desirable features are in your packages? Again, this is another example from the wedding industry project I did a while back. But it was really a very simple exercise of asking customers, do you value photography or not? Do you value a venue or not? Do you value flowers or not? And from there, you can see that, there's three services here which are valued by over 90% of customers. And there's a couple here that are below 60%. And you can use that sort of understanding of customers and valuing those features to build out good, better, best, or small, medium, and large products. And you don't see any better examples of that than when you go to McDonald's and see the Happy Meals. And the Happy Meals have got a really simple formula. They have a leader, a filler, and no killers. So the leading product, or the leading desirable functionality, if you like, is the burger. The fillers are chips and drink. And the killer, which they don't include in a Happy Meal, is coffee, because people tend to prefer the other, those other functions over coffee. So at the end of that process of going through those 5 steps, you land on something that looks like this. You'll see, interestingly here, that I have put the best on the left-hand side of the page and the good on the right-hand side of the page. There's increasingly customer psychology and behavioural economics that comes into play. Typically, you will get higher revenue outcome when you have the most expensive product on the left-hand side of your page and the cheaper product on the right-hand side of the page. But those five areas there illustrate the those 5 questions that I spoke of earlier to help you strike a subscription or a SaaS pricing model. I want to just finish off with a little bit of video. Hopefully the tech's going to work for me. It's a great example of identifying what is value in an industry where you probably don't think of exactly what the value might be. So just bear with me for a minute while I get this video up. It starts in Spanish, so watch for the subtitles down the bottom, please. And then about a quarter of the way through, it changes into English. Let's see what happens.
A mediados del 2013, la industria del arte en España sufrió uno de los golpes más grandes de todos los tiempos.
El gobierno decidió cambiar el impuesto de los espectáculos teatrales del 8 al 21%, logrando la mayor sangría de espectadores que se recuerde.
Un 30% menos de espectadores en tan solo un año. La gente se volcó a consumir entretenimiento probado masivamente como los blockbusters americanos.
Ante esa realidad, la compañía independiente de comedia Teatraneo decidió tomárselo con humor e inventar algo.
Paper Love, the first comedy shows where you only pay for what you consume. We fitted each seat with a facial recognition system that detects the smile and proposed the following deal to spectators. Entrance will be totally free. If the show produces no laughs, you don't pay anything. However, if you laugh, you have to pay for each smile. Each smile produced is worth 30 euro cents, something that in this day and age is quite a reasonable price. At the end of the show, the spectator could check their laughter account before paying and even share it on social networks. And so that no one would cry for having laughed more than they could afford, the maximum amount to pay was 80 laughs for 24 euros. The average price of the ticket increased by 6 euros. The system was covered by the main national media outlets, and this produced 35% more spectators. Each Paper Laugh show produced 28,000 euros more ticket money than was normally taken. Currently, the system is being copied in other theatres in Spain. A mobile phone app was created as a system of payment, and the first season ticket was launched for the number of laughs, not shows. We should also not write off the paper cry or paper what the fuck system. Or maybe not. Paper Love, the first comedy shows where you only pay for what you consume.
So there you go. That is a real live story. Happy to open the floor to questions.
Drop your questions below, folks. Jon, just while we wait for some more questions to come through, I'm going to hit you with some of my own that I've prepared. So who are some of the startups do you think at the moment who are doing a really great job with pricing?
In the cohort?
In our cohort or in the broader industry, some names that people might know?
The guys from Fire, FYRRR, I've had a session with those guys. I don't know if they're on the call, but they're doing really well. Yeah, Chris. I've spoken to a lot of people, and I've been pleasantly surprised at the how they've embraced the feedback that I've provided. So I would flag everyone that I've had a mentoring session with in cohort 4 in particular as doing a good job. Who does a bad job with their pricing? That's always an interesting question. That's one of my interview questions that I ask people, and it's always surprising the answers you get, and it's always a political question too, because people don't always like to to name and shame and so forth. I must admit there's one particular not internet service provider, a domain, a web hosting company that really annoys me, because they have a decoy product when you renew your domain name. So you can renew for 12 months for $30, but the price for a 2-year renewal goes up to $107. And then for a 3-year renewal, it drops back to $60. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that company also doesn't have a policy or doesn't seem to have a policy of communicating price increases to customers. So there's a lot of price increases happening at the moment, and that's reflected in the rate of inflation. But this particular company has twice increased prices with no communication to customers about why they're doing it, what value they've added. The only time you find out about it is when their charge hits your credit card at the end of the month, and you go, where did that come from?
Yep, and that's probably a great thing to move on to our next question, Jon, around, do you have a framework or a process you recommend to startups to follow when they need to raise prices, when we're at scale and they've got several thousand customers and they can't have those conversations one-on-one?
I think you can still, you can't have the face-to-face conversations like you and I are having, but you can certainly have an email conversation. And that has got to be a value conversation. It's inflation and rising costs are being used as they're a justification for price rises that everybody seems to accept, but you're always better off focusing on the actual value that you've delivered over and above what you provided since the last price change, and focus on that. That's my advice there.
Yep. Okay. And in terms of increasing prices, do you think that should be done gradually, or is that just, you bite the bullet and you do one price increase rather than having to do one every 6 months?
It's a really good question. And I think at the moment, we are seeing so many price increases. It's a really tricky question to answer. And I think it's probably company specific right at this very moment, depending on, how costs are flowing through to supply chains for you. I used to strongly advocate that there are much better reasons to increase prices than the calendar changing from the 30th of June to the 1st of July. So some of those reasons were competitive activity. You have a new competitor enter the market. You have a competitor that adds a new product or deletes a product. Unfortunately, you still see, situations of price gouging, particularly in the US when hurricanes go through and stuff like that. So there are a hell of a lot more important reasons and valid reasons for changing prices than purely just the random date of a change in the calendar.
Yeah, fair enough. And for our B2B customers who might be offering, a multi-$1,000 service, you mentioned before that customers love to feel like they're getting a discount because they get a win. Do you see in some B2B businesses that a sales rep may have an allowable discount of, say, 5 or 10% they can give at their discretion?
Yeah, absolutely. So most smart companies have discounting authorizations, usually hierarchical. So, an A-level salesperson has 5%, B 10%, and so on and so forth. See a lot of that, but also seeing a lot of pricing psychology and behavioral economics creeping into things as well. So, you've got to illustrate to customers that getting a deal. So I have another slide in another presentation which has two pictures, the same picture of a red dress. One's got $100, one's got $60 on it. The other one's got $100, $40 off, sale price $60. Everyone will go for the $60 one with the $40 off because they can see that they are getting a discount. nobody can see that they're getting a discount on the other option because it's just full price $60, no discount. So it's simple things like that which can, help with those discussions, but with sales reps, as can a good understanding of gives and gets. So never give away a discount unless you can get something back from the customer.
Yep, fantastic.
Let them earn it rather than just give it away.
Yep, that's good advice. And a question here from Joe. Ask for the card first or after the trial? Credit card.
That is a really good question. I think my answer to that would be to A/B test it. And it also depends on the price. Is it a high price? Is it a low price point? It's a depends answer, and you'll be trading off incomplete trials for more marketing qualified leads, I think. So it's a tough one. It's a depends answer, I think.
Fair enough. And Nalisha here is asking, what's your opinion on reducing the price and what are the impacts when you reduce the price on, I suppose, your broader brand?
There's no doubt that that pricing can have an impact on brand. One of the best examples is that you never see Birkin handbags or Louis Vuitton suitcases with price points ending in nines, for example, 99 cents, $999 and stuff like that. So there is an association of premium with prices that end in round dollars, and there's an association with discounting ending in prices ending in nines are discounted, on sale and special and so forth. I think constantly changing your prices does run the possibility of confusing your customers. Tesla is an example of that. Tesla are constantly they'd say they're fine-tuning, or sometimes I think they might not know what they're doing, but they're constantly playing around with their price points. And that works in industries like in aviation or hotels, where there has been over time an expectation that there's variability in prices, but with cars and stuff like that, I think people expect prices to be a little less fluid. They're a bit more permanent than what they are. But there's a strong association between some pricing practices and its impact on brand. So it's not easy to, people think it's pretty easy to recover from price changes if you get it wrong. It's not always wrong. It's always easier to come down on price, but it's always very much harder to go up in price.
Yeah, excellent. And, I suppose one of the risks of running sales is, whilst it may increase revenue for a short time, you also risk customers trying to time the sale over a longer time period. Once they've seen what you do sales, they may not, buy at that sale. They may wait quite some time for the next sale.
Absolutely. And I know, there's retailers like Target and Big W and stuff like guys like that. They don't have footfall in their stores if they don't have something on sale. I also had someone in a pricing workshop many years ago say to me, and it was a really funny situation because she was the only female in the workshop, and she just turned around and said, "Oh, discounting's like a one-night stand," and everybody just, whoa, what's he just said? But she was quite correct. Once you discount, you get a reputation for discounting, and it's really hard to change that reputation.
Yeah, fantastic. And I've got another question here from Sylvie. When startups are starting to look at a pricing model, is surveying potential customers for best way to get started?
I'm strongly supportive of discovery with customers around pricing models. So you could use that first model, the Van Westendorp or the price sensitivity model, as discovery questions with customers around what they might be willing to pay. You can also it's also beneficial to separate discovery around the preferred pricing model versus the price points. So, if you think of, give customers an example that they can relate to you. Do you prefer to go to a gym on a pay-as-you-go basis, or are you happy to pay a subscription? When you're selling stuff on eBay or Gumtree or whatever, do you prefer a percentage of your final selling price or just a fixed fee? And draw on other examples of pricing models in industries that they're already familiar with to explore potential pricing models that you could use with your business.
And how do you go about that? I've got a question here from William saying, he's got a software business. He doesn't know if he's going to manage to find 10 customers or 5,000 users. Do you have to plan like you are going to get 5,000 users for your pricing model? Because if you don't, you're going to go broke.
That's a tricky one, and especially if you're using, if you want to adopt usage or consumption based pricing, which is tiered, you don't know where to set the tiers. I think, and I've spoken to quite a few in this cohort about running a pilot program. So what I mean by a pilot is that you have half a dozen customers and you say to them, I want you to participate in this pilot. And what this pilot means is that you could be paying me money, you could be paying me a price for this initial service, or it might be free, but for the next 3 months, you get to use the site. And during that time, you give me feedback about the products, the features you like, the features you dislike. You might give me some testimonials, video testimonials. We might do a white paper or a case study at the end of it. And you co-create this offering with the customers, but you also ask them about what they might be willing to pay for the product and services as part of that pilot. If they have paid for something in that 3 months, they know right from the word go that there is absolutely no guarantee that price will continue after the pilot if they want to stay on. And the pricing outside, beyond that might be something completely different to what they're participating in right now. But I think there's a lot of merit in exploring price points and price models through a pilot with early adopters.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about, you mentioned before that there's some early signs that a pricing model may be due for a change. Does that typically come around customer churn or a decline in revenue, or you look at what your competitors are doing and you haven't updated yours?
Yeah, all of the above, and talking to customers. One of the real beauties of that aircraft engine model, which Rolls-Royce, Pratt and Whitney use, is that it is aligned with the customer's model and how they make money. So particularly for those that are working in B2B, in the B2B space, have a think about, can you align your pricing model with your customer's pricing model? Because it'll be much easier to get over the line than having something completely different. But yeah, competition will give you signs that your pricing model's running out of life. Talking to customers, and yeah, other things like that.
Yeah, fantastic. And what books would you recommend to people other than your own book? Are there any bangers out there?
Any bangers out there? There's there's a book called Monetizing Innovation. I can't remember the author's name. It's an Indian name, but I should know it if I can remember Floccinaucinihilipilification. It's called Monetizing Innovation. That's probably a really good read for this audience.
Is that by Matt Haven?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
Ramujan and George Take. I'll drop that in our Slack chat afterwards.
Yeah. That would be a good one. There's a lot of other really serious pricing books that people in corporate land would find particularly interesting. The the sort of gold standard is a book called It's the Strategy and Tactics of Pricing by Nagel and Holden. And I think that's in about its 6th or 7th edition. For this and the other, and there's a couple of books by a guy by the name of Mark Stiving in the US. So he's just written, his first book was called Impact Pricing. I know Mark really well. And his second book has been Win, Keep, Save or something like that, which is all about subscription business as well. So that would be a good one to check out too if you're in a SaaS space.
Excellent. And do you have a hard stop, John, or do you have time for one more question?
No, I can go on a little bit more.
Excellent. I've got another question here from Raphael asking why some large financial services or any, I suppose, software company don't make their pricing public, and you have to, get in touch with sales. Is that a good strategy? Does that typically convert more than if you just put your pricing out there?
That's another question where it really depends, and it's not just restricted to financial services company. There's debate across all industries as to whether they should put prices on their websites or not, and there's pros and cons, and there's articles outlining those pros and cons easily available. I had an interesting conversation a couple of years back with a company in the UK that was running a website, and he did not have his prices on his website. And I asked him why, and he said he felt his staff could better convert customers into paying customers than his website. And that was best facilitated by not having prices on his website. And as I mentioned, there's a whole lot that's been written about this. I think one of the interesting questions is how much integrity do those prices on websites have? Like, are they bait advertising to try and, if you see a website designer that'll do something for $5, is that just bait advertising, or is that really what they do? So there's quite a lot to consider around the question of whether prices should be overt or covert.
And I suppose when you get into those big numbers, relationship that you hold with a customer is just as important around the price as the price point.
Absolutely.
And another question for you, John. You mentioned that you've seen this trend from, buying a product to subscription services and now to usage or consumption-based pricing. Where do you think the future of pricing is going for SaaS and technology?
Oh, that's a good question.
Can you predict the future?
I think there's probably a couple of things I can say that I don't think will happen, rather than what will happen. I think we'll see less and less user-based pricing and more usage-based pricing. And what I mean by that is that when software is in the cloud in particular, you want to get as much usage out of it as possible. And by that, it means unrestricting users and allowing as much usage as possible. So I think, software where the metric is the number of users, we'll see diminish over time. I still think subscriptions, usage-based pricing, and a mixture of the two is going to stick around for the foreseeable future. But I think anything where the buyer, the customer, has an element of control over a purchase decision will get challenged by SaaS companies. So, if you talk to people in big organizations who want access to Salesforce, there's always someone going, have we got enough Salesforce licenses? Do we need to buy another one because they're really expensive? that sort of conversation disappears over time with more usage and less users.
And it probably makes it fairer on the small users who may not fit into the prepackaged customer segments that those companies have made.
Yeah.
We've seen some examples at Blackbird where you'll go from, say, a business account to a pro account, and it's not that much of a jump in the features, but the jump in the pricing is astronomical. So, and one last question. This is probably going to be a bit more difficult to answer. Joe said he's selling mortgages and the price is set by the bank itself. Does he have any control over how he positions himself in the market, or is he just at the mercy of his competitors in the banks?
Yeah, that is a hard question, and there might, Joe, be terms and conditions applied by a bank on what you can and can't do in the market and so forth. But it's almost that it takes you back sort of to the Helicon days of around about 2010, where there was all the talk about disintermediation of travel agents and so forth. And yet there are still travel agents out there. And as long as you can add value over and above what those big four banks can do, then you should have a sustainable business model, or a business model that, at least gives you a competitive advantage until you work out what your next competitive advantage is.
Yep. Great. Well, that's all the questions I've got, Jon. Thank you very much for your time and for being a mentor in our Giants program. We've had lots of good feedback about your insight on pricing. I know I've had a meeting with you myself, and you had some great knowledge which you were able to dispose upon me. So we hope you'll stick around for another cohort, and we'll be putting this recording up in our library for future people.
Thanks for having me. And I'm in the Slack channel if people have got questions there. I'm jumping in and out during the day, and I'll make a copy of the deck available as well.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jon.
Pleasure, Mel.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.